I have as a guest, one of the guest of honors of the festival, Paul Gravett, who was just a few months ago, the book Tove Jansson Illustrator was published in Finnish. Yes, I think it was published last year in some other languages. Yes, and we also have a translator of the book, Juhani Tolvanen, in here. I think it was on Friday. Yes, on Friday he said about Paul Gravett that he's renowned comics historian, and then you said that, well, I'm just geek for hire. So which one you prefer?
Geek for hire, I think is the right term. Yeah.
Okay.
And Juhani deserves big credit because translating this book from English into Finnish is not a straightforward affair, as Juhani was explaining in his talk last week, because of course there are quite a few quotations used in the book from Tove, and they are taken from English sources, because and we had to trace back, Juhani in particular, we had to find out what her original words, to make sure that the Finnish version was accurate. In some cases there were mistakes, where the English basically just changed, distorted slightly her original expression, so that was good. And also, of course, in the book I had to explain Finland, which is quite easy really, but no, it isn't. But I had to explain for the non-Finnish some of the specifics of Finland's history and its attitudes towards women, for example, and other matters, which obviously weren't needed in the Finnish edition, really.
Yes, that's true, of course. Well, what made you do the book about Tove Jansson as illustrator?
Well, this is actually part of a series called The Illustrators, published by Tamsin Hudson, and it's initiated by Quentin Blake, who some of you will know as one of our greatest children's book illustrators. Tamsin Hudson is an art book publisher, and as you and I don't probably think about this, but in the art world, illustration is not thought of in the same level as art. I mean, illustration is definitely lower down in the pecking order, and I would say then below that possibly is advertising and graphic design, and then, as we all know, at the very bottom you've got cartoons, but even at the very, very, very bottom you've got comics. I mean, absolutely the bottom. So with this series, these are monographs, and there's a series of maybe probably about 8 or some of them out already. Dick Bruner is in there, Raymond Briggs, something else did. I did the first one on Posy Simmons, her first ever monograph, was one of the first ones. And there are more coming out all the time. They're looking at doing more of them. One of the books that was being talked about for the series is one on Saul Steinberg. I hope some of you know who he is. He's a genius American artist, did many covers for the New Yorker. But I can tell you that they have tried to get permission from the Steinberg estate, and they said, we will not associate Steinberg with illustration. He was an artist. And wait a minute, I mean, this is the whole reason why this series of books exists, is to try and sort of elevate illustrators, but also to say illustration is just another art form. But the answer, we still have these silly stratifications and, pecking orders of what is art and what isn't.
Yes, and it exists in Finland as well.
Yeah,
we have large exhibitions of Tove Jansson, strongly focusing on her as a fine artist.
Exactly.
And let's say that he was quite okay as a fine artist. No problem with that. She, but that was not her. That's maybe not what he was best at. That's at least how I think.
Yeah, I think this is difficult to quantify because she was good at everything, really everything, from a very young age. As we see here, this is probably one of the reasons. If you're literally sort of surrounded and being nurtured by your mother, who is already a very successful illustrator, and you're watching lines appear on the page in front of you, and you're going to be hypnotized by, I could do that as well. And as you know, her background, her upbringing was in a very artistic community, a sculptor father, a full-time illustrator mother,
yes.
And very supportive and encouraging. it is no wonder that she felt she could take on almost anything. As you know, she wrote an opera, you know about this, she wrote an opera libretto, for example. It's not something that everybody could do. She was good with words and with pictures.
Yes, and so she was doing all sorts of stories.
This is one of the pictures I wish we could have got into the book.
Very
young age. She wasn't just making these as one-offs. These were in multiples. I think the largest print run was only around 20 or something copies. And I didn't do enough research into the actual technology, but I mentioned it here. It's some kind of gelatine printer, some sort of gel printer, which is the kind of thing that I used to have when we were at school. You would get these strange purple-coloured, shiny bits of paper. People of a certain age, possibly not in this audience because you're all younger than me, may remember being at school, getting these kind of pale purpley photocopies before we had photocopies. And they would kind of fade a bit as well. And so they're things that she printed her comics out on, and she sold them in school. I mean, you know, little entrepreneur already. And these are examples of ones that came up at an auction sale.
It didn't take many years after she actually started to draw quite professionally.
She was getting on with it by the age of 14. She
Yes.
was already getting into print professionally, exactly. And this is one of her great self-portraits. It's a very defiant self-portrait, of course, because she's smoking, which was possibly not entirely the right thing for women to do, even in 1940. And you may not know this, but I was watching a documentary where they explained that when they were first marketing cigarettes to women, they were, just in America this was, the Madison Avenue decided they would be torches of liberty. The idea that if you're a woman, you are showing your independence by smoking. Oh, right. You could perhaps show it in other ways that are not cancer-causing, but in this case, it was a way of getting you to accept that smoking for women was acceptable. Now, one of her oil paintings is less well known, and this doesn't appear in the book, I should explain, because the publishers were a little bit nervous about the image being quite full frontal as this and selling it into many, many territories, which is a shame because it's a wonderful painting of the woman named Britt Sophie Fock, with whom Tove had an important relationship, which is still really underdocumented, certainly compared to Vivica Bandler or to Tulika Vietala.
That's true.
Yeah, she appears only in a few letters, I think, and brief mentions here and there. There are some other sketches. This is one picture which Beau Weston, who also helped me with the book, verified is definitely Britt Sophie Fock, and because she had a typewriter, and this is the typewriter on her desk, we know it's definitely her. And she was a jewellery maker, and one of the many mysteries that remain is that, Johanna and I have been trying to find out about this, is that when there was the big Stockman promotion of the movement in 56, 57, something like that, I think it was, there were products. I don't know if they were Moomin products, but there were certainly jewellery made by Britt Sophie Fock as part of that promotion. So they exist somewhere. And then the other great part, of course, is this is a lovely pastel by Tove, kind of channeling a little bit of Degas and a bit of Lautrec. I kind of cite David the Lautrec vibe from this. And as you know, this was the lifetime relationship that Tove enjoyed for the rest of her life, and a beautiful, creative and collaborative partnership, the best possible kind of marriage, really.
Here we have quite interesting.
This is one of the crappy image, and you can't quite see, but in the bottom corner just there, you can see there is a little Moomin holding her brush, as if he's stolen the brush, because she's all ready to paint. She's got the palette, but her right hand is empty because the Moomin has stolen the brush, which in a way, there's a lot of symbolism here, the tension between I want to be an artist, but is actually I have to do all this work drawing the Moomins.
There has been a lot of talk about Tove Jansson wanting to work as a fine artist full time. Will you agree?
She certainly pursued it and came back to painting, of course, several times through her career. I think when the opportunity came to make the movement into a success and into a business, she saw the wisdom of doing this. She saw that it was foolish to deny that. One interesting thing, I was talking to, now you will know this perhaps better than me, but I got to interview the woman who made the Travels with Tove documentary about her and Tuulikki going to Japan and America.
Kanerva Cederström maybe.
Yes.
Doing the documentary film.
Cederström was the
Cederström maybe. Yes.
And the mother of this director was also a fine artist, a woman artist, around the same time.
Eva Cederström, she was working for Garm.
Right, it was
yeah.
Garm. And Eva Cederström, apparently, her daughter was telling me, was amongst the artists in the community who felt that Tove had really, she had made the bad decision to make comics. The fact she was doing comics was just anathema. It was actually a terrible thing to be doing for anyone who wants to be taken seriously as an artist. And I thought that was interesting that came up. She remembered the atmosphere in the art community that was really turned against Tove in some ways because of doing this.
Very possible.
Yeah.
Then again, comics were really strong.
They were.
Her illustrations and political cartoons of Garm.
Yeah.
Also, I think maybe made for money, but really strong.
Exactly.
Really powerful.
Yes. I wish there was
material.
Yeah, and certainly when you come talk about Garm, there was no other woman artists appearing on the front covers, especially with political cartoon content at all. This is one of the images that we weren't able to include in the book, but it's out there on the internet. And I respect the fact that the moving characters, people said this is too personal, a private family photograph to be put into the book. But that's what they told me.
Amazing, because I've seen it in exhibitions.
Exactly. So, and this you have to realize, any book you're making about Tove Jansson is going to have permission, of course, from it, and you have to negotiate which images you can get and which you can't. But I think this is, the little girl in the middle there is her niece, Sophia Jansson, who now runs the company. And in the foreground you can see Tove playing the accordion. I mean, is there anything she can't do? I don't know.
This is really one of the most atmospheric photographs I have maybe seen about the family, having the sea background there.
Yes. And interesting to see, in the background we have Lars in the red hat, and I think the foreground next to Sophia is Vivica. Is that right?
Yes.
Vivica. And then the mystery person behind her in the black kind of cowboy hat is Lars's wife, and of course Sophia's mother, who is Nina Lesch. That's correct, Nina Lesch. Sorry? Nita Lesch, who had a singing career. It's almost completely right that her face would be hidden. It almost says it all, because she's a slightly hidden person, and as you may not know, she actually took her life, I believe, quite early on and had a serious alcohol problem. And this was one of those dark family secrets that was is still kept somewhat under wraps, it seems to me, and certainly obviously had a big impact on Lars and his daughter Sophia.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a bit about illustrations.
Surely.
What kind of illustrations? What sorts of illustrations did she do after the Second World War? How would you describe her work? Okay.
Well, Tove comes obviously from a fine art training, but also from a design training background. She was studying in Stockholm, which was not so much an art school, but a kind of trade school, graphic design school. So she has all of those skills that include typography, graphic design. She designed a fantastic film poster, which is in the book. And so she was an adept at all of this. But still, as you say, she studied in Paris, she went on tours to paint. Painting to her was a kind of a vocation. She wanted to really be like her mother and father in one sense, of being a full-time artist. And this is not uncommon that people want to do something which they're good at, but they don't always recognize that they're perhaps better at something else. And I think, as we were discussing earlier, that when it comes to illustration, when it comes to not just the moments, but generally her writing, her storytelling, which is not an aspect of that painting really accommodates. Painting is usually about the nice, big, painterly image, a single image. But clearly, Tove is a storyteller and an illustrator.
I'm really looking forward to the summer book film, because it
could be good.
It could be good, and also she's excellent writer for adults.
She
but
is.
That's maybe nowadays that's not much talked about.
Yeah.
So it could start some sort of revival.
I think you're right. For people who perhaps haven't found their way to movies, it might give them a way to discover how good she is with writing for all ages.
But it shows very clearly how versatile she was, doing illustrations for the book, writing it.
Yeah, this is unusual, as you know, because these illustrations, originally, Tove was pretty strict about saying that her novels would not, for adults, would not have pictures in, because that's the other very old-fashioned thinking. Not old-fashioned to Charles Dickens, of course, who had people illustrating his novels, but in the modern day, in the 20th century, adults don't need pictures with their novels. But she was asked by the German publisher to make these new drawings for the German edition, and she agreed as long as they put on the front cover the word novel to make it clear to people that it wasn't a children's book. And that's how we got these lovely images. So we could look at some of her early work. This is a book, as you said, actually drawn when she was 14, commissioned in fact. She sent it in to the publisher, but not published until quite a lot later. And because by that stage she was already thinking, by 33, that she wanted to save her real name for the proper, serious, painterly work, the artistic work. She didn't. She used a student friend's name. And this is when she was filling in, as it were, for her mother, who couldn't fill this page in this magazine, and produced this slightly non-biologically accurate love affair between two caterpillars who have baby caterpillars, which doesn't happen, of course, in nature. Never mind.
And amazing enough, she was just 15.
It's so young, yeah. And already using some speech brilliance in here as well, which is nice.
True.
And I'm showing this because it's just nice to, you know this artist, I imagine many of you will do, but we need to know more about him, I think. This picture didn't get into the book. I wanted to show at least an example of Oscar Anderson's humour and drawing, which I believe are one of the things that influenced Tove's work, and she certainly admired from a young age.
Yeah. In my eyes, Oscar Anderson was a bit more absurd.
Yes.
Than Tove.
Sure.
But
and also
stylistically, yes.
Yes, and his humour obviously is more in the everyday, real life, not in a fantasy world.
True, very true.
Yeah, but I think it's the dynamism of his and the imagination that comes through. We have a couple of Garm covers we could show here.
Oh, we could show, yes.
Yeah, this is something where I think we need a lot more coverage, a lot more proper books about all of her work in Garm, because it's extensive, and unfortunately we couldn't show more than just the one cover on the left there. But I love the one on the right where you go from Hitler being a mewling brat demanding more and more treats, more and more cake and things, and on the right he's nearing defeat, and he's sort of hiding away from the end of the war is definitely imminent by this point.
Yes.
Yeah. This images is one that we had some help to find. I think this appeared in is it Swedish magazine or Finnish magazine? Maybe Swedish, I think. It's called Folk I Bild.
Folk I Bild.
Is that Swedish or Finnish? I don't know.
Maybe Swedish, but I'm
yeah,
not sure.
I think it is. And she was chosen as the top cartoonist of the year from Finland. And as far as I know, I think this might have been redrawn rather than just coloured. And it's a wonderful all-time cartoon where there are no toys left in the store.
Yes.
Except ones that say Heil Hitler. And this is fairly daring to do, in fact, during the Second World War, when as you know, Finland was initially allied with the Germans.
Yeah, but her strongest pictures about Hitler were just before the Second World War and right in the end of the war. There were many years when no one dared to do it at all. Do any kind of
course, too dangerous.
Humor about Nazis.
No. This was one that my friend Johanni also helped out with a lot. It's a book which I was determined to find out what it was because it's mentioned in the volume of letters that Bill Weston had co-edited. And in an amusing scene in 1941, her publisher from Söderström, is that the name of the publisher?
Söderström,
yeah, accosted a young lady who looked like Tove Jansson on the square here in Helsinki and said, "Have you got my drawings ready for Svart Erotik?" And you can imagine that in the tense time of the Second World War, this poor young woman was just was panicked by this somewhat. You don't have a strange man coming up to you and asking for black erotic drawings. So she loved that story, and Boll mentioned this and used it, but there was no footnote about what was the book, what's the story behind this. Unfortunately, Johanni managed to find the one copy in the National Library of Finland, which unfortunately was, I think this is the book, yeah, which was quite cropped. And then, moving characters, well, we do Harry artwork for that. Well, we've never seen that before, and that's in the book, and I think it's a marvellous cover. It's a strange book because it's a translation of a Hungarian Jewish writer's novel. It wasn't originally called Svart Erotik. It is about a black African man who comes to Europe and has experiences prejudice and has to adjust. And it isn't really an erotic book. I mean, this I think suggests a lot more than the book isn't delivers, shall we say, but probably quite a commercial cover. And I also love the fact, of course, that Tove designed the type. I mean, as a typographer, as a designer, the whole thing is beautifully designed.
Her mother was very good as a typographer.
Exactly.
So I think
she would learn a lot.
That's where she learned a lot.
And of course, her mum, Ham, was also designing banknotes and stamps. So yes, and we have got a lot of images, so maybe we should race on a bit. You've seen some of these. This is these, as you well know these images, so maybe the next one's more interesting as a cover. But this is something that how Tove arrived at the line style that she wanted, because initially she was doing a lot of the work in these very subtle, beautiful grey tones and these washes of grey. And when the English publisher asked them to switch over to line, she developed further this engraved kind of style. Almost to me, it reminds me of the effect she would get, that her mother would get for the designs of things like stamps and banknotes, which has to be done usually in a lot of line rather than solid colour back at that time. And it results in some really special style, which many people who are inspired by subsequently. Yeah.
Yes, it's true. I don't really know, but maybe I have to. Maybe you are actually the right person to ask about. I think Tove also was very influenced by British fantasy illustrations.
Yes, I think you're quite right. I think you're right. There would have been definitely a
So he was in line with the tradition of.
Yeah. Yes, it comes out from the same period. Yeah, it would be related to those, definitely. And when Tove does get the chance to make some comics, even here, she's already quite playful with the language, and even in the first panel, using the top border as a little shelf to put the pots and pans on is nice. And even though there's no balloons here, we know she's used balloons before, I like the way that if you look at her hand lettering beneath, it goes from being fairly orderly to pretty wild in the last panel where things are getting crazy again. So she's aware that typography can be used creatively in comics. This is just a little advert for the strip arriving. Then we come on to the comic strip. This was an important section for me for the book because, to be honest with you, the comic strip is still probably amongst some Tove Jansson fans, it's thought to be a sort of maybe a mistake. Even she said it was like a prison sentence, or it was a purgatory. Or it was very hard for her, of course, making a new strip every day, 6 days a week was really tough.
And she even wrote a short story.
She did.
Being in a purgatory of being a.
Yes, because there is once. If it's the same story that I'm thinking that I wrote, it's when a guy who sort of seemed to have had a breakdown, and by the end, and he's visited by another artist who's taken over the comic strip.
Yes,
but at the end, it's actually almost a little bit optimistic. It's just the idea of maybe I could come back and help a bit. I think that's.
Yes, there was sort of existentialist tone.
Yes, yeah, I thought so. Definitely, she was channeling that. So just on the left there, of course, you've got the familiar European, as in Finnish, Swedish strip collections. But in Britain, we only had one strip collection, even though, as you may know, the strip first appeared in the London Evening News. And it took a while, until 1957 in fact, for the first volume to collect the first 3 or 4 stories, and then there were no more. And this information about the strip almost disappeared my friend Dylan Horrocks, who's done a little tribute here to Toby, rediscovered these movement strips which were forgotten. And you have to remember this is going back to the 70s or so, 70s, 80s, where before the internet, how did we ever learn anything? We learned it from books. And if we see it here, this is the interesting quote from Breitberger and Fuchs from their very important book, which I got as my school prize, because I was a SWAT, I was top of the class, just 1 year, I think, somehow. And I chose this book. And my teacher said, you can't have a book about comics. This is a proper school, we can't give you this. I said, no, it's a serious book about comics. And this is where Dylan spotted these Moomin strips. And these are the German editions that were coming out in the early 70s. This is actually from 55, but the book was from 72. And from there, Dylan and I essentially helped eventually lead to these books these strips being reprinted extensively by Drawn Quarterly, because the photocopy of the English book I sent to Dylan in New Zealand, he sent it on to Seth in Toronto, and Seth showed it to Chris Oliveros from Drawn Quarterly, and they said, we're going to do these. And of course they've done these beautiful volumes.
And it's really amazing because at that time already Tove Jansson was well-known name. Everybody had heard about her from some angle, but the comics were really never published as real collections. Now we're talking about, well, just 20 years ago. At that time in Angola, where they have one of the biggest festivals in the world.
Yes.
It was really news to anyone there to just tell about this, that there is a moving comic.
Exactly.
So it was so disappeared in a way.
It was weirdly forgotten internationally, and so this is it's wonderful that this has given, of course, a whole new boost, I think, of interest.
Absolutely, and it's beautifully designed.
Yeah, they've done a very nice job. They have done much so. So this, we could just nip through. This is an exhibition. You can go to the next image. This was in Brussels. There was a big exhibition in 2010 for the 65th anniversary of the movement. And then it was at this point when these pieces of work came to light. I think, again, thanks to Johanni, who probably ought to be up on stage really, but it was you, wasn't it, that found these drawings, I think, in Tove's studio, is that right? Or in her home? Amongst various papers, it wasn't, they were sort of buried amongst her papers. And what these are something that she would send into to the London syndicate at the London Evening News. They would be, if there was a new story, she would already have the story plan, but she'd then also start to sketch out new characters, new situations, new outfits, or whatever the Moomin characters might be wearing. And these had never been seen before. We didn't know these existed. And some were shown in the exhibition in Brussels for the first time, and then there are other ones shown in the new book. And this also gives you an idea of how Tove and her brother Lars worked together on the strip at this early stages here, with her composing it, of course, in Swedish, but then Lars writing in English underneath for the Associated Press in London. And that was the very first Moomin. So all of the Moomin stories begin with the big circular backside of the Moomin, which is very charming. And there was this was not a small thing. There are still things missing in my research. I spent probably a couple of days in the British Library trying to find any report about the fact that there was meant to be Moomin advertising on the new double-decker buses in London in about 1955 or something like that. And I thought, surely somebody's going to have photographed, if not them advertising the new buses. And somebody, there's a bus spotter out there. There are people who love buses and bus history. I had a friend at school who actually would go around the playground at lunchtime believing he was a bus. Seriously. He was very, very into buses. So for a long time, as I say here, this is thought to be, this is a reproduction. There was only one strip that was meant to survive, because incredibly to us now, the Associated Press, the syndicate, destroyed the original artworks. They didn't think we could send them back. Well, you could do that, that would be the proper thing to do, and they just destroyed them. We have the films, we have the proofs, we don't need the artwork anymore. So there was thought that there's hardly anything left, bits and pieces, and this was the only one that survived because Tove made it and then withdrew it from the continuity. I don't need this bit of story. And of course, if you take a strip out of continuity and save it for later, you'll never use it, because the situation will never come round again to insert it. But then, through a bit of research and to an archive of cartoon drawings in the University of Kent in Canterbury, they had a box of Tove Jansson material, and amongst them were some of these very few surviving strips, which are wonderful to see in the original, and were exhibited in London at the Dulwich Picture Gallery a few years back for the first time, and we showed some of those in the book as well. This is a nice storyline from the Riviera, where you've got a sort of this almost Salvador Dali kind of artist with his moustache, just marvelling at Moomin Papa and his bohemian lifestyle and the sheer freedom he has, and how boring it is to be wealthy, and how much more fun it is to be an artiste like this. Then this next image is perhaps the most surprising, this one, because this is just what happens. If you're lucky enough just with the internet, somebody just says, my father's just died and he's left this strange drawing, but do you know what it is? And I couldn't quite believe what we're looking at here. David Myers, his daughter, sent me a scan of this, and it's in the book. It's actually an early draft where you can see her, which we're only about the very beginning of the very first story, and she's working out the narration, the drawing style, even the balloon style here is not quite formed yet. Even her signature isn't quite formed yet.
Yeah,
and this obviously was going to be thrown away. I mean, it's been seriously damaged with coffee stains and goodness knows what, but it's survived as a very rare thing. And this is another lovely thing that we were able to find. One of the other routes to find material that wasn't from women characters was from auction houses. Quite a lot of interesting items turn up, going up for auction, which women characters don't own. And this, we weren't able to find out who it's made for. There's a little dedication at the bottom right there, which I think says to serve, something to serve, til serve. It's an enchanting drawing.
Yeah, I can't really...
Let me just go back to these are recent drawings, just to go back a second. Just because this is a nice to show, there's still things that I haven't. Have you seen this before?
No, I haven't. When I went through the illustrations that you sent me, I was amazed by this. Basically, I've never seen this.
This is obviously not published. It's done for my uncle's logbook of sailing. And there's this fantastic image, this joyful image of them all on the boat having a gay old time, should we say. And even there you've got some flying movements perhaps. There's a moon at the bottom, isn't there,
Yes.
And some strange flying elephants suggesting intoxication perhaps at the top. And this is what you were attending on last Friday at Le Tovares, which is confirmed in a letter to Eva Konekot that this is definitely Tove's favourite restaurant here in Helsinki, or one of them at least, but certainly perhaps the most recorded one. Johanni and I were able to put up a little plaque, officially, with approval from the Moomin characters, to celebrate at her table. We had a wonderful dinner and champagne. Thank you very much to the restaurant. And you can now, well, of course, there's now already a waiting list for this table till next year. So book up, and you can pretend you're having dinner with Tove yourself. Good. And this is the little image, but just blurb about the book.
Yeah, that's about monographies in general.
Yeah,
about the series.
It's a great pleasure to work on a monograph. I've done sort of big, extensive books about graphic novels and manga and things. It's just nice to hone in for about 12,000 words. It's not enough on one creator's life and work. It's very, very enjoyable.
Very true. Well, while you're in here, I'd like to ask some questions not related to Tove Jansson.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, let's talk about the books. Or let's talk a bit about your past. In the 80s, you were editing Escape, the anthology.
Yeah.
What was that like? Well, what kind of anthology?
Yeah. Well, Escape was well, in one sense, if to understand Escape, it was basically a raw fanzine, as in a magazine before Raw magazine, which you probably know is where Art Spiegelman and François Mouly published comics from all over the world, and also serialized Mouse. And I say that because we interviewed a great many of the raw artists, like Jo Swarter and Mark Bayer and Charles Burns, for example. And both Peter and I, my partner Peter Stanbury and I, we were both so amazed by what raw suddenly blew open. You saw this more than we ever realized to comics. But at the same time, I also was very influenced by European magazines like Suivre, for example, and Strapazine, of course, came along from Switzerland, and many others. And the idea was to really generate a new wave for comics in the UK, where we had to have something to come along that wasn't 2000 AD sci-fi, nothing against that, or children's Beano and Dandy stuff, or even maybe underground in the kind of slightly stuck approach to underground, where underground comics just has a little circle of outrage that it's fine to do but doesn't change. And clearly what Raw showed is there were lots of other ways of making comics that we hadn't seen. So we were lucky to be in the 80s. There were new artists emerging, particularly through the small press. Eddie Campbell I saw last weekend when I was at SPX in America. I hadn't seen him for quite a long time. And Eddie Campbell was one of the people that stunned me and my friends at the time by doing slice of life autobio, which now, if anything, is a genre that is almost too ordinary. It's become so familiar to us, it doesn't surprise us. But back then, you must realize we hadn't seen anybody trying to describe in a poetic and lyrical way their everyday experience. And that was somebody I just knew we had to put into Escape. Escape essentially grew out of running a distribution service and table called Fast Fiction, rather like the tables that are next door, but we aggregated many different people's publications and offered a service to sell them for them. And from that we found that the talent that would go into Escape. From there it developed from being a little A5 digest. After 7 years we switched it to a more conventional magazine size, which meant that we could translate work from Europe. So we translated Tardi, Jose Munoz and Carlos Sampaio, Yosuata, many other people, Götting, for the first time into English. And we were also getting the magazine out onto the newsstands. This was not just nothing against being a fanzine, but we wanted to reach a broader public. The magazine ran for 19 issues, from 83 to 89, and for the last 10 issues we had a real publisher, a real book publisher, who was uncomfortable venturing into the magazine world, because of course there you have the problems of sale or return, you have the problems of needing to print a lot in order to get comics out there. So in the end the magazine didn't continue after the 19 issues, but we had a good run, and I think in many ways we helped kickstart a lot of new approaches to UK comics.
Well, having such a long perspective on comics, well,
yes.
I would say, after 40 years you
Yeah.
could say,
Yeah.
to have quite a long perspective, working with exhibitions, attending, I guess, thousands of festivals maybe, writing books. What's your opinion of comics at the moment? What is contemporary comics scene like? I know this is a broad question, but...
Well, we're in an interesting phase, not just within comics, but within pretty much all culture, aren't we now? Because I feel it's a good phase to be in, because of course we've had a lot of exclusion, a lot of prejudice in the arts, and more generally in society, towards minorities, towards people of colour, towards LGBT people. And clearly right now we're in this corrective phase. It may only be a phase, but it's a long overdue phase of acknowledgement and acceptance and celebration. The fact you have this Tom Finland show here at Kiasma, I just went to see today, the fact that Tove Jansson is celebrated as well, of course, with her own day on August the 9th. These are all very, very positive things against the prejudiced times of the past. But I suppose and the same thing happens with comics. I mean, we have comics getting more accepted than ever. I suppose for me it's a slightly strange experience, because having grown up with more in a period when comics were looked down upon and wanted them to become successful. What happens when they become successful? When you start to become, what is there to push against? We've made it, but have we really made it is the question, I suppose. And more important, as important to me, is the fact that, in my opinion, comics needs to stay, to have some edge, to have some, to not be too conformist, not to kind of fit into a pattern where it becomes repetitive. I use the word to get stuck, but even if it's the kind of self-publishing which we're seeing in the halls downstairs, if it is basically just the same, then it's no better whether it's more and more superheroes or more and more westerns. Nothing against either of them, but we had a lot of them. If now we have more and more autobio, even more and more LGBT, which is fine as well. I know we need that. But the fact is, it has to still try and be innovative and individual. And I believe that there's a danger of just adopting or not challenging yourself, perhaps, to be thinking in more original ways. What was exciting about some of the escape artists that we found is that they were just doing comics in their way. They were almost, if you like an outsider artist. No one had told them, this is the way you do it. No, they hadn't looked to see what are other people doing, and I'll fit in. I'll use the same peach, orange, and nice mauvey purple, which I'm just mentioning, you may not have noticed it, but I mean, I'm very sensitive to colour, and people are using the same buttons and the same colours on a lot of comics at the moment, which tell you that they're sort of cool. I mean, there is a kind of, this partly is the influence of Nobrow, who employed a chromatician to set up the particular palettes of their books, and that was actually more important than, that was the first thing they did. The first thing was the palette. Whatever else comes afterwards was a secondary thought. I'm just saying that there's a need, frankly, there's this cool orange on the front of my book, which is just, it's the cool colour, one of the cool colours.
It's the same orange that was already there in the 70s when I was born.
Yeah, but for me too. Yeah, for me
it's
too.
Here again.
It's here again. So
I've waited for 45 years and it's in here.
I come up with words which nobody uses, of course, but I thought of sort of individual. I thought of individual, where I'm looking for someone people who are doing things in their own way without too much reference to what's around them. That's what I was really looking for.
What kind of artists or graphic novels have been meaningful to you lately?
Well, I mean, I have to say that I'm lucky to have not had a problem adjusting to manga. I know there are some people who find it difficult to even get close to, but if you pursue it, and especially if you look out beyond the big blockbusters, which are often fabulously clever, but you look out for the more individual works that are out there, there are still great works being produced there, and great material historically being produced there. And I think that you have to keep looking, but in the UK we have an artist called Gareth Brooks, who has done a remarkable book called The Dancing Plague, which combines embroidery, stitching, which I know has been done by, there's a woman artist from Finland who does this too, isn't there?
Hanna-Riina Mossen.
Hanna-Riina Mossen,
yes,
exactly. But also combines that with pyrography, which is literally burning, in other words. And the demonic figures in this story about the St. Vitus's dance, the religiously inspired plague of the Middle Ages, the demons are embroidered and the regular ordinary people are done in brown burnt lines or sometimes in shading. And I'm not saying that's just a gimmick, it actually, there's a good sense to that. It's using these different artistic tools but to add to the levels of meaning of the comic, and it's a brilliant example of that.
It's a fantastic example. I love the book, but we do have like 2 minutes.
Okay.
So maybe if you have any questions in the audience, there is time for some.
Yes, at the back.
Now that you're sort of up to things, do you see something interesting emerging? What is in the future of comics?
Right. Well, at the moment, I'm curating a gallery that's going to open in 25, which will have at least one gallery I'm looking after about the futures of comics. They wanted to come to the end of the exhibition and produce an epilogue. I said, there can't be an epilogue. You can't have an ending of this. The art form is changing all the time. And having just met Saka, he's a Finnish artist who's made this extraordinary granite sculptural project called Zone, which I think he was talking about earlier today at the festival. This is the kind of comic you go, I've never seen anybody do this, and it's extraordinary. It's certainly the heaviest, physically heaviest comic, but I've asked him, how heavy is it? We had lunch just now, and he obviously has to get all the bits of sculpture and weigh them, and then he can go into the Guinness World of Records, because they haven't got a record yet for the world's heaviest comic. And then, of course, as soon as they do, someone will come along and make one that's heavier. So the whole art form will multiply. But this is you want to see the art. This art form is still full of potential beyond, and not just digital. I'm quite interested in as I call it, and maybe you as well, post-digital, because I think we're all kind of just, digital is not necessarily the only answer, and we want to get back to the tactile and the haptic and the high touch, not the high tech. But the gallery space in Brussels will accommodate changing exhibitions and new commissions to try and show the way that the language of comics is changing. It's not just the medium being used, but actually that we can still build on the storytelling. What does alarm me, though, I don't know how many of you are reading any kind of vertical scrolling webtoons, but if you remember, back in the day, Scott McCloud was predicting that the internet would bring us the infinite canvas, where you could go off in all directions and it would be like a porthole into a huge universe. Instead, that porthole has become a drip feed of one panel at a time, every panel being a surprise, and never seeing a whole page, let alone a spread, and never going back or forward in the story. It's the instant and another instant, which is what we're in. We're in it's comics as Instagram, and to me that is not exactly a development of the comics form, in my opinion. It's definitely made the medium reach many, many more people. New audiences are getting it, and it can be surprising, it can be innovative. But certainly we want to do an image where someone's falling down off a cliff for sort of 300 pages or something, or panels. You could do that. It's very powerful on a vertical scrolling phone. But it is, I'm wondering if we're going to be able in the future to multitask using our phones and realize it hasn't always got to be just that. We have different actions we could take. I just heard recently that a big name manga artist is introducing a new comic. His next comic is going to be relying a lot on horizontal scrolling. Horizontal scrolling. Whoa! It might just get people to realize, you mean I can turn my phone on its side and I don't have to be watching a video, I could actually read comics horizontally. And I saw a Chinese webcomic where if you're in a new location, you can just look 360 degrees all around and you know where you are in the world of that story. So, we need to continue to innovate and not rest on our laurels, whatever they are. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And I'm happy to sign books if you'd like me to. They'll be on the table, I guess, in the hall.
Yes, I suppose.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was a whirlwind. I hope that wasn't too much for you.